a delight to be here. Day before yesterday, I was in India, and I feel grateful that I get to share a little bit of India with you today in New Bedford. So this is fantastic. I want to talk about Gandhi 3.0. I'm from the Silicon Valley, and we like to put version numbers on everything. We don't spare Gandhi either, you know. But before I do, I want to share a little bit of my personal understanding, a journey of understanding Gandhi. This is a photo of Gandhi and a famous Indian economist, sort of India's Schumacher, if you want to call him that, J.C. Kumarappa. So J.C. Kumarappa, at a very young age, says, Gandhi's ideals are something I long to create, spread in the world, so he dedicated his life to Gandhian vision. Towards the later part of his life, he lived very simply in a small little cottage. There were about 15 Harvard professors that came to visit him to understand what he was talking about. As they're visiting him in his room, it's really sparse, except he has two photos. They look at the bottom photo and say, oh, that's Gandhi. And Kumarappa says, yes, that's my teacher. Then they look above and says, that looks like a bunch of ordinary villagers. Why have you placed them there? And he says, oh, that's my teacher's teacher. For Gandhi, what he would call the common man, it was all about the common man. He paid homage to the common man because he knew the fundamental resource that's going to change the world is love. And everyone has that capacity to love. And when you operate from that space, the universe responds back to you. This was the basis of his entire movement, of his entire life. I learned that as Tam was sharing. This is in 2005. I actually had hair. My wife and I decided to go on a walking pilgrimage across India. So we would eat whatever food is offered, and we would sleep wherever place is offered. And it was, to say it was life-changing would be a huge understatement. It was paradigm-shifting in so many ways. It's one thing to talk about acts of kindness in your comfort zone, but to be out on the streets and to be constantly, one day you connect with somebody, next day you're in a whole different setting, and you're really trying to say, look, how can I birth love here, birth love here? It was a very profound experience. But one of the big things was understanding Gandhi and his homage to the common man. Gandhi had this faith that everyone can give, everyone can love, everyone can be kind. And we experienced that. People would, a fruit vendor, if we're crossing by on the street, he would be so excited just to connect with us as human beings, and he would say, here's a slice of watermelon. A barber would look at us and say, oh, you need a haircut, come into my shop, and they would give us a haircut. Or a couple like this. This is Udeshi Kaka. Udeshi Kaka has very little. He comes up to us one day on the street. He says, would you be willing to come to my home? I would like to feed you and host you for the day. I said, sure. And he says, but I have to warn you, I'm really poor. I don't have any running water, any electricity, but I grew up with this idea that guest is God. And you have come into my consciousness, and I feel moved to offer something. So we went. And as it was mealtime, we discovered that these people couldn't even afford food for themselves. They borrowed food to feed us that day. Because for them, the hunger that they might have had was less important than this capacity to shower these strangers, me and my wife in this case, with love, with generosity, with care. So we saw this repeatedly. And this question, which I grew up, everyone saying, look, it's nice to give, it's nice to be kind, but before you give, you have to have something to give, right? It's a very natural question. Until you think deeply about it, and then you realize, wait a second, that means I was born bankrupt. I didn't have anything, and only when I accumulate all this stuff that I can go out and give. Is that really so? So this question, do we need to have things before we can give, really starts to look like, what if things wasn't the most valuable part of giving? What if we're here to give something much deeper? This is Shakuben. Shakuben is someone I meet in India often on a lot of my trips. She's been a janitor for about 30 years, extremely poor. One day we're talking about this, about small acts of kindness. And she says, I also want to do acts of kindness. And we talked about Gandhi. And Gandhi, at one point in his ashram, he lost a little pencil. It was like really small. And he's looking everywhere for that pencil. Kakasaheb Kalelkar, a famous Indian poet of the time and an author, he says, Bapu, That's how they refer to him. He says, Bapu, you're looking for a little pencil. You're father of a nation of 1 billion people. Here's 12 pencils. Don't worry about that little pencil. And Gandhi turns to him and says, no, Kaka Sahib, that pencil was given to me by a child with a lot of love. Right? It's not just the pencil, it's the love. So Shakuben hears that story, and she says, I'm sweeping in schools every single day. And I know a lot of people don't even have those little pencils. Maybe I can pick those out. And I could take those little thrown away erasers and the blunt sharpeners, and I could give them to people who don't even have that much. It wasn't the stuff, it was the love that was around it. And she is a woman of a deep faith, of a deep kind of love. And she started doing it. And I went over to her place one time, and she gives me a bag as I'm about to leave. And the bag has all these things. I couldn't even open it at the time. I was going in for another talk afterwards. I took out the bag, and for the first time, I put my hand in there, and it wasn't just these pencils and erasers and sharpeners. It was love. I couldn't help but tear up. And so did everyone else who was around. That was the power of Shakuben. So if we can value what cannot be counted, the first big insight is that this inner transformation matters. What happens within us, it's not just what's on the outside. On the outside, it's just a small little pencil, but what's happening to her on the inside through that process is being transmitted through that tiny pencil. And that counts. That inner transformation counts big time. But what exactly is inner transformation? Right? I think it has two components. One is the physical element, the other is the internal element, mental element. At the physical level, we all know you do small acts of kindness. It gives you, I don't know if you've studied the research, there's so much research on this. Your immunity goes up, you live longer, you have this sense of happiness. There's all these neurochemical responses that your body goes through, even in the smallest act of kindness. Matthew Norton at Harvard did this study. He gave people money, and he says, you can do two things. Go out and buy stuff, or go out and give it to a stranger. Most people said, look, I don't know about this giving money away. I think the smalls make me happy. And he said, sure, go out, do whatever you want to do. Turned out when they look at their happiness response, when they look at their brains and the neurochemical responses, it turns out that even if you're a skeptic, you feel a lot happier when you give money away. So he says money does make you happy. You just have to know what to do with it, which is to give it away. And, of course, greater gratitude, because whenever you give, you create all these connections. And as you create those connections, you have a greater, deeper sense of belonging. And Robert Emmons at Davis has done a lot of research on gratitude. It's very profound. So this happens at the physical level, so to speak, although it's at a subtler physical level. But at the mental level, this is my friend's daughter, super cute. At a mental level, what happens is any act of giving creates a kind of mental stillness. And that mental stillness allows us to fall into a sense of interconnection. Not a sense, an actual experience of interconnection. And that interconnection brings us to enough. And that enough, again, triggers greater act of giving, mental stillness, deeper interconnection, and a deeper sense of satisfaction. And this is a virtuous loop that keeps on going. This is profoundly powerful. So if we lead with inner transformation, this thing that Shakuben with the small pencil exemplified. If we lead with that inner transformation, I think we get to the second big important point, which is that everyone can give in their own unique way. It really doesn't matter the size or the scale or the scope of what you're trying to do on the outside, because the inside is where a lot of the value is. This is a photo of my parents. 17 years ago, my parents decided to do something very simple. We live in we're an average family. We have all the things that everyone struggles with. We have some things that make us happy, like everyone else. It's nothing out of the ordinary. But my parents said, we want to help. We want to serve. We want to give back. What can we do? So they thought of something really simple. They said, look, we have space. We didn't actually have extra space, but they said if we move the couches out to the side, we actually have space. Maybe we can just hold people and their journeys. So 17 years ago, my mom, another friend, and myself, we decided to sit in silence, just three of us. We said, we'll sit in silence for the first hour. In the second hour, we'll share aha moments of the week. And in the third hour, my mom says, look, I got to feed you anyway, so I'll feed whoever else comes. Little did she know, this is our shoe rack outside. Little did she know that over the last 17 years, she would feed more than 40 to 50,000 people in our very home. Right? And none of it gets counted on the GDP because there's no donation box. There's zero economic transaction going on. It's just space. We're saying, here, I want to open my heart in this way. A lot of people come up to her and say, Auntie, hey, what's the plan here? Like, you could do so much with this. My mom says, look, you know, my plan, our plan, is to confuse you with gratitude. And when you're confused with gratitude, you open the door, you're going to go out somewhere, and wherever that somewhere is our home too. So it's okay. It's the whole world. They actually operate like this, right? When you go out and say thank you, they come back and say, no, thank you for the opportunity. And you have all kinds of people that end up coming, and all kinds of ripples that are created because it is offered in such a pure way. There's these beautiful ripples that happen in the world. So many of them we don't even know. But this guy we know. His name is Pancho. Pancho, self-described anarchist. He wants to try to create a better world like everyone else. But he didn't know exactly how to go about it, so he experimented with a bunch of things. And then his first hour of silence, first hour of meditation, was in our little space. He meditated. And he realized, oh man, there's a lot going on under the hood. And if there's so much turbulence going on inside, it's going to translate on stuff on the outside. And of course, we're going to create that kind of world. He says, how can I start to calm myself down? And he does that. He lives on the border of 3 gangs in Oakland, consciously. They don't lock the door. Top floor is just dedicated for anyone to come in and sit in silence. It's amazing the kind of things he does. But then Occupy Oakland came about. He heard at midnight, on Sunday night, Monday morning, if you want to call it that, he heard that this is the first Occupy Oakland versus the police. It was the first sort of showdown. And the police was really showing its might. And at midnight, they heard that, you know, the rhetoric of violence is just ramping up and up and up. And he says, who knows what's going to happen? But if they're ramping up the rhetoric of violence, this guy says, we got to step up the nonviolence. So what are we going to do? They got a bunch of people. At 3 a.m. at night, they decide to go to the site. They start meditating. At that time, there weren't even police in the back. They're just meditating. They said, we're here, do whatever you need to do. I'm just stepping up my nonviolence. 6 a.m., all these choppers come in. You know, millions of dollars are spent, you know, to control these guys who are meditating. And sure enough, they arrest these guys. And for Pancho, it was a lot on the line because he's an undocumented citizen. And so for him to say, look, man, I'm really stepping up my nonviolence, do what you need to do, but may love prevail in your heart, in my heart, in the hearts of the whole world. Right? So he goes, they arrest him, they put him, he's in like red, motion restricted. I don't know why they do that. He's like one of the most lovable guys, but whatever, they must have their logic. So they put him in. Pancho, the woman locking him up, all this stuff, right? Pancho looks her in the eye and says, sister, and he has this way of love, right? You're too beautiful to be doing this work. The woman starts crying. They lock him up in this solitary cell. He's vegan. He's had 4 oranges in 4 days. He didn't know what to do. He can't even move his hands. He's like, oh, I can meditate. Puts his 2 shoes on the ground, sits on the shoes, and he's meditating. And in that position, he says, I want to be kind to the person who comes after me. What can I do? I can't even move. He decides to clean up that cell. It was filthy. He cleans it up in whatever small ways he can. He takes out a piece of paper and writes a note to the person that comes after him, to the prisoner that comes after him. He says, brother, you don't know me, but I want you to know that I love you, and I've done this in the spirit of love and connection. Even in that jail cell. And that whole, if you ask him, where did you get that capacity to be so other-oriented when you don't even have any food, when you can't move your hands too much, and when you're in so much stress? He would say it is that inner transformation. It is that meditation. And where did that start? From this ordinary couple that says, we have space in the house. Come use it however you want to. And now, so many people look at that and say, oh, that's easy. I could do that everywhere. And so there's 80 places around the world that have tried these awaken circles. It's beautiful. Martin Luther King said, everyone can be great because everyone can serve. And I think we have a lot of exemplars, but it's everybody. It's not just some people, it's all of us. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, tells us that actually once you go up from the physiological, then you move up and you finally get to self-actualization, this inner transformation. This is how we pump trillions of dollars into so many places. We know it doesn't work if you look at all the numbers. So now scientists are saying it looks more like vitamins, right? You don't finish vitamin B and then you say, I'm going to get to vitamin C when I'm 38. It doesn't make sense. You can't look at people and say, oh, you don't have a right to be generous or kind because you're way down there. Right? So we have this capacity, all of us have this longing to serve and to love. And what happens when everyone practices generosity? Karma Kitchen, some of you might have heard of it. You walk into this restaurant. We essentially rent out a space, and we run it with volunteers, a restaurant space. And we said, you come in here, your check is going to read 0. It's 0 because someone before you pays for you, and you pay forward for people after you. How is that going to work? Because we were told that we're all selfish, so if you just trust people to pay forward, aren't they just going to grab? Turns out they don't, right? In 12 places around the world, this is in Indonesia, they had Ramadan, so instead of doing lunch, they did it at dinner. It was incredible. Everyone across Indonesia was talking about it. As you can see in those small little bits, it says, park your ego, greed, and fear here, and fill yourself up with love, compassion, and generosity. And everyone is doing that, even if they're in the back doing dishes or they're, plating your order. This is like, yes, you got to have peas on your rice. This is an Indian restaurant in Berkeley. You got to have peas, but you can put the peas on a smiley face. You can imagine if you're getting love on all sides. You can imagine what happens in such a space. So there's so many beautiful stories that happen when you hold space in this way. When you realize that, we can actually create a circle where I take care of you, you take care of someone else, and what goes around comes around. It's not transactional. So if I give a great shoulder massage to a person in front of me, the guy behind me doesn't really give me much. You're like, man, it would have been much better if I did a transaction. But actually what you get in return for that is the circle. We get each other, and it's super powerful. There's a guy who runs his art magazine, incredible art magazine, on a pay-it-forward basis. There's a person in India who runs a rickshaw on this basis. And his whole bread and butter counts on it. He says, I have faith that if I count on you, if I give you an act of kindness, that your heart will respond. And I have faith in that capacity of your heart to respond to love. Right? He's putting his livelihood on the line in a context where rickshaw drivers are taking everyone around and they're seen as corrupt. He's saying, no, that's not the case. There's a woman, Twee, who's doing this acupuncture clinic with the same kind of concept, creating gift ecology. So there's lots of different expressions of this kind of love. So if everyone's generosity gets connected, I think we shift from transaction to trust and rebuild a gift culture. Not just a gift culture, but a gift ecology, which goes much deeper than a culture. So to review, if we can value what can't be counted, inner transformation matters. If we lead with that inner transformation, we realize that everyone can give in their own unique way. And if everyone's generosity gets connected in a circle, we can really start to rebuild a gift culture. So this is what we're doing with ServiceSpace. Lots of different projects. Some are online, like spreading good news. KarmaTube is a portal that has inspiring videos just like YouTube, not just like YouTube. We have smile cards that you guys have probably seen around here that encourages people to do acts of kindness. And then you have offline spaces, and there's a whole series of different projects. It touches, millions of people. But sometimes people come back and say, look, if Gandhi were looking down at us right now, he would look at the problems we have. They're unprecedented. 2 billion people in extreme poverty, rich and poor divide highest ever, nature being pillaged, mass urbanization, you can go on and on. How is this little thing going to help, do much? And I said, yes, it is true that God, we have much more complex, much more evolved problems, which are not that simple to solve. But we also have very new possibilities. We also have an incredible potential of new solutions that weren't feasible before. And this is where Gandhi 3.0 comes in. Gandhi 1.0 is one-to-many connection in the times of Gandhi. In India, you had another man by the name of Vinoba Bhave, Gandhi's spiritual successor. He went from village to village. He inspired the landowners to give to the landless. 5 million acres, never done before in the history of mankind. He used pure generosity. But his model was one-to-one. And then, what we see in nature, what Gandhi and Vinoba both talked about, is many-to-many. And this is the possibility of our time today. This is one-to-many, hub-and-spoke model. It's known as Sarnoff's law. This is sort of the TV world, right? And so if you had a room of 50, I think I'm doing a workshop later today. So imagine there are 50 people in that workshop. If it was a one-to-many, we would have 50 connections that are possible. This is one-to-one. And Metcalfe's law tells us that there would be 1,225 connections in that room of 50 if everyone connected one-to-one. But this is many-to-many. That's Reed's law. And Reed's law tells us that that number in a room of 50 people is 1 quadrillion. Group-forming networks. Right? So you go from TV to telephone to internet, and this is the capacity of the internet. But this alone is not enough. Internet allows us this breadth of connections. It's incredible. It's massive. It's profoundly innovative. But it doesn't tell you anything about the depth of the connections. The depth of we've tried it for profit, we've tried it for protest, and I think it's time we step up and do it for love. And that's where you bridge the internet with Kung Fu Panda and the internet, right? How can we do that? I think that's the potential. So I want to leave you with this one thought. This is a woman, post-Hurricane Katrina, walking down a street that she grew up in. Now, on this street, these used to be houses and everything's destroyed, completely destroyed. Except one thing that survived Hurricane Katrina. It was these oak trees. And the reason why these oak trees survived is because they have deep roots. It wasn't just about the branch tips, they had deep roots, and it wasn't even enough that they had deep roots. It was that as you get deeper into their roots connect to the roots of other oak trees, sometimes up to 100 miles. So that Hurricane Katrina comes in, it's this giant force, and you're shaking, you're saying, oh my God, my little tree, it's gonna go down, but then you connect with the roots, and then you have this massive network that is invisible to the common eye, that says, oh, I'll give a little, I'll give a little. And together, there have been oak trees that have survived since the time of Columbus. And so I think that is the invitation for all of us, not just to look at the breadth, but to look at the depth of our connections and really tap into that space of love where we are connecting our branch tips to the roots, and in connecting to our roots, we connect to each other and find that oneness. Thank you.